This is The Law Show on CL 650. Now back to the show.
Welcome back to the show. Our guests from MurphyBattista LLP are Scott Stanley and Stephen Gibson, both lawyers, personal injury lawyers. And during the break, we were talking about, because most of the conversation so far has been about insurance companies, specifically ICBC. Although at the beginning of the program, we did identify the fact that both of you, prior to joining MurphyBattista, worked for large private insurance companies. So you know their playbook, you know their mindset, and you know how they approach resolving cases. There's a different culture in private insurance companies, isn't there, Scott?
Well, they are. They are very big and they're very powerful. And like anything, power has the potential to corrupt. And what we see, or what I suspect happens, is that, you know, when they're dealing with other claimants and other lawyers, I think they're accustomed to having people yield to them.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, if we're dealing with an insurance company that's really unfamiliar with MurphyBattista, they're unaccustomed to having someone who won't yield to them. And, you know, they'll say things, well, this is all we're prepared to pay. And it's, well, we're not guided by that. We're going to be guided by what we think a judge is going to order both of us to do, what you to pay and for us to accept.
Right.
And, you know, it's kind of a paradigm shift for some of them sometimes.
I'll bet. Case in point here, Steve, you've got a very interesting study of a woman and her private insurance company, and the whole story revolves around her householder's insurance policy. It's quite a story. Tell it to us.
Yeah, a few years ago, a very nice woman and her husband, they had purchased a home that their parents had actually lived in previously. And unfortunately, one evening there was a fire that started in the basement. The wife was the only one in the home, and basically she was burned right out of the building and just got out with her life. And she ran to a neighbor, reported it. Fire, you know, department came, put it out, and the insurance adjusters came out and alleged arson. And they thought, oh, this is a very suspicious fire. And they thought, you know, gas patterns, and they were suspicious. They also thought that there was lots of kindling that had been set up for this fire because there were a lot of newspapers stuffed into the walls and the ceiling in the basement. Well, what the insurance company didn't realize was that the father of the husband had been previously lived there, and he grew up during the Depression on the prairies.
Okay.
And they used to stuff, and he had dementia. When he was younger, he used to stuff newspapers into the walls.
For insulation.
For insulation.
Right.
And so the insurance company was using that to suggest that, you know, this husband and wife had basically cooked up an arson. And these are real salt-of-the-earth people.
Right.
So they provided them with no coverage. This couple ended up living in a tent on their property beside their burned out home, and when they came to us, and so we got the story.
And how long after the fire did they end up in your office?
Oh, I'm trying to remember the timing. I think it was about a year.
Oh my,
it was a long time.
Okay.
So they had set up a little tent city beside their house
after numerous rejections for any kind of compensation from their insurance company.
Yes,
they had a lawyer too, didn't they? Before us, they had a lawyer before us.
Yes, yep. They did have a lawyer before us, but he just wasn't moving it along, and these people were living in a tent.
In a tent, right.
So
which is okay in July, not so cool in January.
Now, the real sad part of this story was that these people lived in a small town, and everyone in the town was aware of these alleged arson allegations.
Oh, okay.
And so basically their reputations were destroyed.
Sure.
And it wasn't until we got involved that we were able to, you know, hire proper fire investigators, not, you know, a hack that we say was hired by the insurance company. And then further, we were able to garner further evidence to show that, you know, that this was not arson.
Mm-hmm.
And so we say that the insurance company ought to have seen clear evidence that they just ignored when they denied this claim. And there's a very important case in Canada, a precedent called Witten versus Pilot, and it was one of the leading cases on punitive damages. You were asking
we
earlier.
Talked about it earlier. Yeah.
And it was a house fire case, and an insurance company ignored their own evidence, their own investigation in denying a claim to a legitimate insured, and the people ended up getting a $1 million punitive award, and that was precedent setting, clearly precedent setting. So we had what we thought was a similar potential scenario to present to the insurance company. So when we finally got to the mediation, Scott and I went together, did a great tag team job, but it was clear that not only did they have to pay the insurance part of this case to let them rebuild their home, but they also had to pay something extra for the pain and suffering that they went through, and they had to post in the local newspaper that they were vindicated as a result of this process. And that was probably more than the money. That was the most important
the
part
restoration of one's reputation. Absolutely.
Yes.
What? No, this was you resolved this at mediation?
Yes.
Yeah, you have to bear in mind, though, Sterling, they sent an investigator into the small town to investigate, but at the same time infiltrate the theory that they'd burnt their home down.
Right.
And I mean, this lady had a small business. People stopped coming to her business. She lost that. You know, so when we were at the mediation, they were like, well, we're prepared to negotiate with you maybe. And we said, no, this is not going to be a negotiation. This is going to be a capitulation.
Right.
You have 30 minutes, and this is what you are going to do. You're going to pay them what you owe them. You're going to pay them a sum of money for punitive damages, and you're going to put in an apology in the paper. You've got 29 minutes now.
Right.
And they looked at us like these guys are serious.
That's
And
right.
we are serious. There's a new paradigm shift.
Right.
And they came back at minute 28 and they says, can we have another 30 minutes? And we said, yes. And they eventually came and got the deal done.
So you managed to see, now this is again my misunderstanding of the whole notion of punitive damages. I thought the only person who could award punitive damages would be a judge having a seat. But in this case, you negotiated a punitive damage in the case of a company who was clearly in need of being caught out at that sort of behavior.
Yeah, well, what happens in a case like this is someone makes a denial, right? And it's really hard to change your mind. Like sometimes, do I ride the ship to the bottom or do I admit I'm wrong? Human nature, it's tough to do.
Okay. Unfortunately, we're fresh out of time, as is always the case. We're just kind of getting warmed up. But a fascinating discussion, and I thank you both for your patience with my questions and for a lot of wonderful information, as is always the case when MurphyBattista pops by on The Law Show. So Steve Gibson and Scott Stanley, thanks very much. And we look forward to this again soon.
Thank you for having us.
And we'll see you next time here on The Law Show on